Hi there. We're going to take a look at your 2.5 Hawks homework. But before we get into that, you just really need to have a strong understanding of integer work for it to make sense when we start throwing variables in there. So I wanted to do kind of a recap of an earlier lesson just to make sure you have a good understanding of integers and kind of how I talk about them when I'm doing problems. So in my head, I don't really do number lines. When we're adding or subtracting integers, I don't even think of adding or subtracting. I just think of combining them. Sometimes they're positive and sometimes they're negative. So let me just throw some examples at you. And I think of these like positive chips and negative chips or whatever it is. I've got 5 positives in this first example. I've got 5 positive chips. Got it. But this minus sign is making the 3 negative. So I've got 3 negative chips. And ultimately, they just start canceling each other out. So these cancel each other, these cancel, these cancel. So in my head, I'm always thinking, what do I have more of? Do I have more positives or do I have more negatives? Well, the bigger number I'm going to have more of. So I have more positives. How many more? Well, I've got 5 here and 3 here. So I've got 2 extras. So ultimately, that's going to get me my 5 is 2 bigger than my 3. And since my 5 is positive, I'd have 2. Positive 2 as my leftover, or what 5 minus 3 would be. Now, of course, we know 5 minus 3. There's nothing tricky about that. So let me start throwing that negative in different places. What if you have a negative 3 and a positive 5? Well, then you swap those. It doesn't really matter if the positive 5 came first or if the positive 5 came second. It's still a positive 5 and a negative 3. And so when I combine these, the 5 is the bigger number, so I have more positives than I do negatives. So my answer is going to end up positive. And how much positive? Well, these 2 extras. It's also positive 2. Again, doesn't matter which order you write this. You're just looking at how many positives and how many negatives. So let's look at this next one. I've got a negative 8 and a positive 2. So do I have more negatives or more positives? I have way more negatives. How many more negatives? Well, if I cross off, I'd have 6 of these negatives. So when I combine a negative 8 with a positive 2, I'm going to be left with a negative 6. All right, so this next one. Sometimes you see this as a minus sign. Like right here, I used a minus. Sometimes they write it as plus a negative. It means the same thing. This number here is negative, whether you write it with a minus sign or you write it with a plus a negative. All right, so I have 8 positives and I have 4 negatives. So which do I have more of? Well, I have more positives. How many more positives? Looks like I'd have 4 more positives. So then my answer is a positive 4. All right, now just trying every which way that we might do this. What if both numbers are positive? I've got a positive 5 and a positive 3. Well, that means they're all these black chips. These are all the positive chips. So I'm just going to add. I got these 5 and I got another 3. All right, I got a total of 8 positive chips. So it's a positive 8. But that can work with the negatives also. If all the 5s were negative and all the 3s were negative, everything's negative. How many total negative do I have? Well, so the negative 5 and the negative 3 all together, it's going to get me a negative 8. Okay, so the one tricky thing that you do have to work on here or understand is when they have a minus minus together and there's not a number between there. So right here you can see minus and then a negative. I'm subtracting a negative. All right, I have it shown right here too. Subtract, subtract. If I have that going on, minus minus, we always take that and we turn that into a plus plus. Plus plus meaning that, oh, that 3 is actually a positive 3 then. Because I've got a positive here and a positive here. It's all just plus. So I've got a positive 5 and a positive 3. Everything's positive. I have 8 positive chips. All right, let's try it again. Here you have minus minus. It's going to change to plus plus. So this 3 is positive. You can see I've put 3 of the positive chips there. But the 5 on this one was negative. So those are red chips now. And so It looks like I actually have more negatives than I do positives. How many more? Well, I'd have 2 extra negatives. All right, so I just think in my head again as just combining these and figuring out which one I have more of. That's when I'm adding and subtracting. All right, so if you're multiplying and dividing, there's different rules for that. And I always think on multiplying and dividing that if I'm multiplying like things, then my answer is going to be positive. If they're both positives or they're both negatives, if I'm multiplying like things, both positive or both negative, my answer is positive. If I'm multiplying different things, a positive with a negative or a negative with a positive, then my answer will end up negative. That's on multiplying and dividing. Multiply and divide the same thing, you get positive. Multiply different things, you get negative. Okay, there's my recap. Let's go do this 2.5 lesson. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is just combine like terms. Now, like terms, well, and let's even identify the terms in here. The terms are always separated by pluses and minuses. So we have this 5x, this is a term. This negative x squared, that's a term. Negative 7, negative 7x squared. I have 4 terms here. So I'm looking at the variable parts on them. If the variable parts match, then they are called like terms. And when I say match, they have to be exactly the same. So what I see in this one that matches is this x squared and this x squared. Those variable parts are identical. Now this x that's here by itself, that's not identical, so it's not a like term. So to combine like terms, really all we're doing is combining their coefficients. Their coefficients are the number in front of them. So there is no number in front of this one, so we assume that there's a 1 that it's being multiplied by. So what I really have here then is a negative 1x squared and a negative 7x squared. So if I combine, I have and we're adding and subtracting here. So I have a negative 1 and a negative 7. So all the chips are the same. They're all negatives. How many negatives? 8 negatives. Okay, so there's negative 8x squared. The variable part doesn't change at all. You just leave it as whatever that like term variable was. Now that is the only like terms that we can combine there. Other than that, I have this positive 5x still sitting there, and I have this minus 7 sitting here. The order that you put these doesn't really matter. We typically would probably start, if there was an exponent, we would start with a higher exponent and then go to the one that doesn't have the exponent. And we'd always put our numbers at the end. Now, if you were to switch that around, it doesn't really matter as long as you keep your signs proper. All right, let's try again. All right, looking for like terms. Again, here's a term, here's a term, here's a term, and here's a term, all separated by pluses and minuses. So I can see that I have an x here and an x here. So I'm going to combine their coefficients. So that's a negative 7 that I'm combining with a negative 8. They're both negative, so everything's negative. I have a negative 15x. Now let's try it with the y's. I have a positive 9 and a negative 7. So a positive 9 and a negative 7. I have more positives. I have 2 more positives. All right, so it's going to be a plus 2, and the variable part is just a y. All right, hopefully this is making sense for you. Let's keep going. Now I'm going to mix it up. I'm going to make it a little harder, because what you're having to do now is get rid of some parentheses before you're able to combine the like terms. So these parentheses, you'll notice that I have a number in front. I have this 4 here, and there's nothing between it and the parentheses. That implies multiplication. I'm taking 4 times this whole set of everything in this parenthesis set here. So to show that I'm going to take that 4 times this parenthesis set, we do something we call distribute. we take that 4 and we distribute it through the parentheses. It's going to get multiplied there, and it's going to get multiplied over there. Let's see what we have left when we do that. So 4 times 2y, they're both positive, they're the same thing, so my answer is positive. So it's going to be 4 times 2 is an 8, and that y just attaches. All right, plus, now I have a 4 times 2, that's another positive 8, and then I have out at the end that has nothing to do with the 4, I just have this separate plus y out here. Once you get rid of your parentheses, you're looking for like terms. I have an 8y, and I have what we assume is a 1y. 8y and 1y is a 9y plus 8. That 8 that's in the middle here. All right, that's all we can do. All right, let's try again. This is a tricky one here, this next one, because of this minus sign that's in the middle. Now right here, out here, I'm taking the negative 4, and I'm going to distribute it and distribute it. On this side, this minus sign has to get distributed also. I have to subtract both of those. Sometimes what we do is we think of it as a negative 1 there that's going to get multiplied through. Multiplying by 1 doesn't change it, so that's why we put a 1 there. All right, let's go ahead and do this distributive property. I'm going to start over here with my negative 4 times 3x. Notice that it's a negative 4 and a positive 3. I'm multiplying different things, a positive and a negative. So my answer is negative 12x. All right, let's try again. Negative 4 times the positive 2y. Negative times a positive, that's going to be negative because they're different. 8y. Now I'm going to move over to this second part, and I'm going to pretend there's a 1 right here, a negative 1. And this negative 1 is going to distribute. So what do you think? Negative 1 times 2x. It should be a negative 2x. And then a negative 1 times a positive 3y. Should be negative 3y. All right, that first part is just to get rid of the parentheses. Now I'm ready to combine my like terms. I have an x term and I have an x term. Let's see what we can do with those coefficients. This is a negative 12, and this coefficient is a negative 2. All right, so a negative 12, again, I'm back to adding and subtracting. I like to say combine. If you have a negative 12 and a negative 2, everything is negative, and I'd end up with negative 14 chips, and then x, just attach that variable on the end. All right, what do you think for the next, the y term? We have a negative 8 and a negative 3. They both have the y, they're like terms. What is negative 8 and a negative 3 going to get you? Negative 11. All right, there we go. All right, last one. Let's now distribute the 3 through, my goodness, there's a lot of things in this set of parentheses, but this 3 has to go to every single one of them. And then this 2 is going to go to every single one of them. Now it is nice here that everything is positive. So all my answers are going to be positive. And all I'm doing is distributing. So 3 times x squared. And a 3 times a positive 5x. That's going to be a 15x. And a 3 times a positive 5. That's a 15. Now I'm going to distribute the 2. 2 times x squared. And 2 times x. And 2 times 3. That's a 6. All right. Now I'm looking for my like terms. I'm going to start with that higher power, that x squared term. I have a 3x squared and a 2x squared. They're both positive. I'm just adding them up. It's going to be a 5x squared. And then I'm probably going to go to my x terms. So I have a positive 15x and a positive 2x. Should get you a positive 17x. All right, the last thing then is this 15 and this 6. They're just numbers. They're like terms. I just add them up. I get 21. And there we have it. All right, that's it on combining like terms. Let's try doing some evaluating. Now, evaluating is a lot of times we're going to be doing those multiplication rules. So remember, if you multiply the same type of sign, if they're both positive or both negative, then you have a positive answer. If you multiply one of each, you'll end up with a negative answer. All right, so evaluate means that you are going to plug in a value for the variable and then determine what does it equal. So in this case, they tell me that x is equal to -4. So I'm going to grab that -4 and I'm going to put it in place of the x right here. Let's see what's going to happen. I'm going to have a -6. I'm going to come over here where I have more space to write. -6, and then I'm going to put this -4 in here and I'm going to square it. All right, let's go ahead and just do the plugging in of values. So here it says y is equal to -7. So let's grab that -7 and put it in for the y. And then I'm going to keep writing my equation. I have a -5, but instead of y squared, it's -7 squared. And then the next term is just a number. I don't have to do any plugging in of values. I'm just going to put -2. Now, you have to remember your order of operations from a previous lesson. I have some multiplication, I have some subtraction, I have an exponent, and your order of operations tells you to do exponents first. So I'm going to take this -4 squared, and that's just a -4 times a -4. And since the signs are the same, my answer will be positive. So it's a -6, and that's going to become a positive 16. -5, and if you have a -7 squared, well, again, it's going to be a negative times a negative. That's a positive 49. And then -2. The next thing the order of operations would tell me is to do the multiplication that's happening right here and right here. I have a -6 times a positive 16. I'm going to do a little bit of side work over here. I'm going to do, because we can't use a calculator on a test, so I'm going to take 16 times 6. Now it is a negative times a positive, and since they're different, my sign will end up negative, but let's do the long multiplication here. 6 times 6 is 36, and that's 6 plus 1, that's a 96. So it's going to become -96. All right, I've got to do it again. I've got to take 4 times 49. I'm sorry, 5 times 49. So 5 times 9, that's 45. That's a 20 plus 4, so 245. Except that notice that the 5 was negative while the 49 was positive. That's going to leave me with a negative answer, -245. And then I just have this -2. So now let's take a look at what you have here. All three of these numbers are negative. If they're all negative, I'm just going to add them up and make the answer be negative. It's like all the chips being the red chips. You just add them all up. So I have a 245, I have a 96, and I have a 2. And I'm going to add these all up, and then I'll make my answer negative. All right, so I have a -343. Okay, a little bit more work in this evaluating. I did kind of start with one of the trickier ones with that x squared going in there. I say start with. We've only got one more to practice on, I think. All right. On this one, I thought it was interesting that they just have like the negative with the x, and they don't put a number here. That's okay. I'm going to take this -3 that x is equal to. I'm going to take that -3 and plug it in right there. So it's going to end up a -3. Now I'm going to take this -2 that y is equal to and put it right there. So it's going to end up -2 times -2. And then I still have the -5 out to the side. Order of operations says I should be doing any multiplication before I do any addition and subtraction. And one of the things here, this is ultimately like a -1 that's being multiplied. Negative times a negative, that's a +3. And then again, I have a negative times a negative, so that's a positive 4, and then minus 5. And then you just do this left to right. 3 plus 4, that's 7, minus 5, that'd be a 2. All right, and I think this is a duplicate. Accidentally, I put the second one of the same one in there, so this one we're not going to do. But what I do have is a little quiz. All right, it's kind of like one of each type, and I just thought maybe after I went through it, maybe you want to practice a few on your own. So what you can do is pause the video, and when you're done, come back and let it keep going, and I'll have the answers here for you. But right now, just pause your video. All right, take a look at my answers and see if you agree. And if so, we'll guess it's time to go try your certification and see how you did. And see if you can get through it. Good luck.